Constantine, the Emperor of Rome, for some reason which nobody's ever been entirely clear about, decided that Christianity should become the established religion of the Roman Empire. And that, of course, made a huge difference, because it meant that Christianity became acceptable, they weren't going to be persecuted anymore, but they also became part of the establishment, of the people in power. And so, that, as I said, that made a lot of difference. But the one difference it did make, which was very important, was that Constantine, being an emperor, wanted things to be well organized. So he said, now the trouble with you Christians is that you disagree about too much. You disagree about what you believe, and even about the nature of God. I want you to agree. So we can have another council. And this was at a place called Nicaea, which is very close to what we would now call Istanbul, just over the Bosphorus, from there, just over the Sea of Marmara. And he said, you're not leaving here until you agree. And they thrashed out their difficulties, and the two issues, really, around which they were having difficulty agreeing, were around the nature of Christ, whether he was divine or human, both, exactly what did they mean, and about the nature of God, which has come down to be the belief that God is three persons in one God, which we call the Trinity, which is a greatly misunderstood teaching, because it doesn't mean three gods. It means three ways of understanding how God has made himself known. And so the orthodoxy that got established at that point, and some people kind of left the church at that point, because they wouldn't go along with what was agreed. So there were Christians who kind of, I don't know how to put it really, they kind of floated off. They didn't become part of the main body of what was Christianity at that point. But after that, what they held to was that Jesus had to be talked about as God and man. You couldn't have the one without the other. And the Trinity was described as the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. And they were in relationship with each other. So that was what was going on at that point. Some people, as I say, moved away at that point. They regarded some of it as being, I once remember talking to some Coptic Christians in Egypt. And they said the trouble with those Greek Christians is they go into too much detail about the nature of God. You don't have to go into that much detail. And I thought that's really interesting. We were talking in French at the time. I suspect it was easier to agree in French than it was in our own language. For a period after that, but there was kind of unity in name, but gradually, because of what was happening politically, there were two big parts of the church which gradually were moving away from each other. One of them was based on Rome, and the other was based on what was then called Constantinople, which was also called New Rome, Istanbul, if you like, now. And they gradually, as I say, were moving away from each other, and it was partly political, but there were also matters of belief. But it came to a head in the year 1154, and the final point of division, there was the issue had been, where did authority sit in the church? Who really was the ultimate authority in the church? Who decided? And the Roman Church said it was the Pope in Rome, and the Eastern Church said no, it's a shared authority amongst what were called the five patriarchs of the church. And the five patriarchs of the church, they've added one since then in Mosque, but that didn't exist then. Mosque wasn't converted to Christianity for a few years after, a few hundred years after that. Was Alexandria, Jerusalem, Antioch, Constantinople, and Rome. They were the five patriarchs. And they wanted it to be equal. And the Rome said, no, there has to be one that makes the final decision. And that was really the underlying reason for the split, but it was the reason given was, I'm not expecting everyone to understand what this might mean. I won't have time to go into great detail about it. Was over what was called the double procession of the Holy Spirit, which requires the theologians to go to work, but it's basically about whether the Spirit, the third point in the Trinity, proceeds equally, derives equally from the Father and the Son, or whether it comes from the Father through the Son to the Spirit. So it was quite a technical thing, but it kind of gave respectability, I think, to what was basically a political division. And that political division was really later, very soon after that, within 50 years of that event, was really brought out because when the Fourth Crusade set on, they took a detour. They came from Western Europe. They took a detour to Constantinople and virtually destroyed the city. So this shows you how much Christians are capable of loving one another when they really put their minds to it. So there was a division between the Eastern Church and the Western Church, and then in the West, what developed was what was called the Holy Roman Empire. And there was a lot of tension between the Holy Roman Emperor and the Pope at various points. But then the next real challenge that happens in the church is what we call the Reformation. And the Reformation didn't happen suddenly, though it's very appropriate we should be talking about this now, because it's exactly 500 years since the symbolic moment that marked the beginning of the Reformation, when Martin Luther, who was a German monk, challenged the Roman Church directly. But he'd been building up over time. Gradually, national governments are becoming quite critical of the amount of power that the Pope had in Western Europe. They didn't want to have it. There was a lot of trouble from this country, for example. At one point, this country was put under a ban by the Pope. So gradually, they were getting more confident. This is the period when countries like France and Spain and so on actually become countries in the way that we recognise them now. And then also, there was the development of other very important things like printing. And the advantage of printing was that people were able to read the Bible for themselves. Those who could read Latin could read it anyway, but once it began to get translated, and one of the big issues around the Reformation was whether they were going to allow the Bible to be translated and printed in the language of the people. So, for example, whether you would be able to read the Bible in English in England. Up to that point, you could only have read it in Latin or in Greek, but not in English. And there was a huge issue around that. And in fact, the interesting thing is that Henry VIII, who was the king at the time that the Reformation really began to happen in this country, actually persecuted, through Thomas More, who was one of his chancellors, persecuted the man who was most responsible for translating the Bible into English. Henry was a very interesting figure because he was a conservative in matters of religion, but he wanted to have power over the church. It was very interesting, because many people don't realise that if I said to you, who gave, the Queen's inherited the title, who gave the monarch of England the title Defender of the Faith? There are people here who know the answer. Who gave it? The Pope. The Pope gave Henry VIII because of an essay he'd written denouncing Martin Luther. And that's one of the reasons why the Church of England is so peculiar. Because one of the reasons the Church of England is so peculiar is because we describe ourselves as Catholic and Reformed. We're not one thing or the other. Because people usually just say, oh, the Church of England is Protestant. It's not. It is, but that's not all it is. It's Catholic and Reformed. And that's, to an extent, that's to do with the whole thing about Henry VIII and it being established. So there was the Reformation period, which had lots of things going on. I mean, that was about the corruption of the church, the challenge over certain doctrines, and so on, and the development of national government. And then, once the Reformation had happened, two things happened. The first was, the people on the Protestant side kept reforming. They kept reforming. So, and they split up amongst themselves. So that's why you will find, for your, if you're trying to, you know you have to go.
If I can,
Yeah.
maybe 2 minutes talk and then we can see the whole.
No, I can't interrupt my friend Steve. I tried it once 20 years ago. It didn't work then, and it wouldn't work. Steve, thank you very much, and thank you everyone for showing your support for Muslim Welfare House and the mosque today, so we reach out and do things together.
Thanks, Sorry. So the Protestants then, so when you hear things, people talking about people like Lutherans, Calvinists, evangelicals, and all those kinds of things, then that's where it all begins. And this went on, this period went on for 150 years or more, with Protestantism breaking up into smaller groups, and at the same time the Catholic Church, provoked by this breakup of Christianity in Western Europe, reforming itself in what was called the Counter-Reformation. So the Catholic, actually, it's one of those things where the Catholics began to reform themselves, so, which if they'd done it sooner, might have meant that the breakup wouldn't have happened in the way that it did. But it had to happen before in a sense, before they got the point. So there was a kind of, after that, there was a kind of status quo. You had the Roman, what we're now called the Roman Catholics, to distinguish them. The Church of England, the Reformed churches, all existing. In this country, there was a lot of trouble. There were wars. The Civil War was partly about religion in this country. And that gave rise to further breakups within the Protestant tradition. So you sometimes see churches called Presbyterian churches. I mean, you've lived here long enough now to know how peculiar this country is. The Queen is the head of two distinct Christian denominations. In England, she's the head of the Church of England. In Scotland, she's the head of the Church of Scotland. The Church of Scotland is a Presbyterian church. It's not the same as the Church of England. So it's a very strange, so she kind of changes as she crosses the border. So she's a very, very clever, talented woman. And then you've got more, a bigger breakup. You've got people like the Baptists developing, the Quakers. There are more and more groups developing, particularly on the Protestant side. There were attempts to try and hold everybody together by various monarchs and governments. They tried to hold everybody together by enforcing certain things, like the use of the Book of Common Prayer, for example, which was introduced and which was very much used, certainly in the Church of England, until 40 years ago, I would think, was the main service book for the Church of England. Then in the next century, in the 18th century, you get Methodism developing. And Methodism was another one of those things that developed as an attempt to reform the Church of England, just as the reformers in the Reformation period tried to reform the Catholic Church. But the Church of England wouldn't listen, so the Methodists, who had no desire to break away, the Wesley brothers, who were the leaders of the Methodists, decided they had to break away because their activities were getting restricted. And so you get another bit of the church developing. And then, in the last period, in the early 19th century, the Church of England itself begins to reform. And it does so, there are two particular traditions. There's an evangelical strand, which actually begins in Islington. That's where it begins. So Mary's Upper Street and round there. the evangelical movement, and in other unlikely places like Clapham, for example. Clapham and Islington, I suspect, were very important to the evangelical revival. But also on the other part of the church, showing how rich the Church of England is, there was a reform within the Catholic movement within the Church of England. That began in Oxford. And gradually these two traditions became very... So when you go in to a Church of England church as a stranger, unless you know in advance, you can never be sure